Call a meeting to order. Kyle, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bame, Ms. Chaput,
Here.
Mr. Dugan,
Here.
Mr. Eppers,
Here.
Ms. Finney, Mr. Heil,
Here.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Kirkton,
Here.
Mr. Klemp is here, and Mr. Yockley.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, the meeting minutes have been distributed. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion, corrections, additions? No. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, minutes are approved and adopted. And if there's nobody for public comment, is there any objection to breaking our order and having Mara Perry come speak to us? Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Mara, thank you for being here.
Most definitely. Hello to everyone who I haven't met before. So I understood you had some questions related to a couple of sections that were planning and zoning.
Yeah, I think that when we were going through the charter and looking at boards and commissions and we got to your section, Neil thought it would be a great idea if you would speak with us and give us some insight into your department.
Sure. So I know these particular charter sections tie pretty directly to state statute requirements. So I did go ahead and grab those sections and I put them on some slides in case you wanted to look at the language. But essentially, for most cities within Missouri, the Plan Commission is established through a requirement on the state statute, or I shouldn't say requirement, but the state statute gives the cities the ability to establish a Plan Commission and then asks them to establish sort of how many people are on it and how they serve. But it does give some guiding information to each of the cities on how they should establish that Plan Commission. There's also language that establishes a city plan, our comprehensive plan. There's another section that establishes subdivision plats and how they move through the process, as well as the Board of Adjustment. And so I think a lot of the language kind of ties together with what state statutes requirements are. And then ours then had small sections in the charter that then were then reflected in the zoning ordinance. So there, or the city code. So there's more establishment. It's almost like there's a sentence that says, please establish a Plan Commission at state level. And then there's the section here that goes into a little more detail. And then there's the section in the code that broadens it of who should serve, how many terms they should serve, and things like that. Same thing with the section that ties into public, some of the public hearing notification. There's some sections in the state statute about how many times you have to inform residents. There's another section that talks about if someone's going to protest, what that notification area is. And so our charter matches that notification area. And with subdivision plats, there's a lot more in the state level. It goes to one sentence, one really long sentence in the charter. And then it goes into an entire chapter in the city code. And that entire chapter covers a lot of information. So I do have those sections if you wanted to sort of see them, and I can make those available also. And I kind of just grabbed a few of the key, most important parts of those sections to tie them to what's in the charter.
Okay. Would you like to see those this evening? Sure.
Okay,
Hold it for you.
thanks. And I put them in the order that they're in the charter. That's okay. So that first section, that's that 89.310. Municipality may adopt a city plan and appoint a commission. And that kind of ties directly to establishing and operating a plan commission, which is that first 11.1 organization in Article 11. If you want to go ahead to the next, or I could grab the thing. This talks about the membership, the terms, and the vacancy. So it talks about a very broad range on the state level. You can have as little as 5 citizens. You can have as many as 15. It talks about how to fill vacancies. It talks about whether you have, as we have a council liaison. All that information obviously is not put into the charter, but it essentially gives us that next set to establish how we would then have that plan commission to respond to the council, and if the mayor is also chosen to be a member. You want to go to the next one? This talks about the city plan and contents. This talks about when you have your commission, how you should establish a city plan, which you'll see a little bit further down, I think a little bit in the recommendations to council, that the recommendations to council are supposed to come out of a zoning plan and a city plan. So both having a zoning ordinance as well as having a comprehensive plan to reference back to. And it talks at the end about the commission can also prepare a zoning plan for the regulation of the height, area, bulk, and location. The main part is talking about like what your city comprehensive plan should do, which is recommendations for the physical development of land uses. So again, it has another reference that says you should also look at 89.010 through 89.250. There's a lot more information about how to kind of create that plan and create your zoning code and what we should be able to do. The next one. This is about public hearings and notice. Talks about the at least 15 days notice at a time and place of the hearing and published in general circulation. It was put into the charter with the general notice 15 days prior to the hearing, and talks about the additional notice of interested persons, and talks about the 2 times in the newspaper. So our 2 times in the newspaper is a little bit more than what's required here. There's also, I think I did the next section. Can you click one more? Oh, I put it in twice. There's another section that talks about protest petitions in the code that talks about the 185 feet. So I think that's why in the charter, the 185 feet for notifications was put in, was to tie back to if someone does want to protest a zoning, that the 185 feet covers you ahead of time should the protest come in place. And then if you want to go one more, this one, it talks about just in general, the governing of subdivision of land. So that goes to that 11.4 subdivision plats. So this talks about how the Plan Commission can recommend to the council regulations for the subdivision of land. That's a chapter in our city code, has a lot of information about all the different ways you can do plats, subdivisions, re-subdivisions, whether it's a boundary adjustment, whether it's a lot split. But this code section establishes at the state level that the Plan Commission would recommend to council. And then I think the next one, this is the establishment of the Board of Adjustment. And this one's continued on 2 slides. There's a lot of information on the establishment. So in the charter, it just says there shall be a Board of Adjustment appointed by the council, and it talks about it being powers and duties by law and ordinance. So at the state level, it does talk pretty specifically about the respective numbers of years that as you started up initially, what terms they hold, talks about the 3 alternate members, which we do have in place. If you want to go to the next slide, it talks about how you can remove them, how you should deal with vacancies, chairperson. It's a lot more information than pretty much anything else. And then our Board of Adjustment is in our zoning code. It's in the chapter 53 and reflects essentially most of this information in regards to how they operate. But then there's another section in the city code that establishes the term limits and some of the other information for the Board of Adjustment. So I thought those might be important to note. I'm not as familiar as the charter with all of what all of you are doing. It might be that if there's things on the state level, you don't feel like it needs to be established in the charter. But some people do feel that reflecting what's in the state level to ensure that that next step in the charter includes some key important elements, Plan Commission, Board of Adjustment, subdivisions, could be something that should remain.
Are there any questions? Kathy?
I've got a couple. So environmental concerns are increasingly a concern, and zoning and planning is really sort of paramount. When you look at our carbon emissions for the city of Webster, they are higher than lots of other places where we do poorly. Is that built in your decision-making in any written form? Do you guys think about that? You know, things like tiny houses in backyards and housing density and those things. Is that directed by any of the charter or rules of the city?
So the various chapters of the city code do address some of it. And we've been making amendments over the last few years to try to address it better. So for example, our stormwater chapter of the code, there are some elements in the stormwater chapter. We've are a co-permittee with MSD in regards to stormwater and impervious surfaces. We at the Plan Commission level have started to have the discussion about trying to make an amendment to the zoning code to more better reflect less coverage on particular lots. But each of those steps requires us to go through public hearings, to go through code amendments. And it's a lot of times reflected on staff time and what sort of comes to the forefront. But we did make some initial code changes. We've started some additional research on accessory dwelling units. We had done some code amendments for 2-family dwelling units. The Plan Commission did look at adding multifamily to our commercial districts so that you could start to put some more density automatically in commercial areas. We've been looking at electronic vehicle charging stations. We made some new amendments to allow in some of the areas of the city for solar to go through without going to Architecture Review Board. So we've been doing bits and pieces as time allows. I've been here for 10 years. So over the last 10 years, those are just some of the ones we've worked on.
Is there anything in the charter that would help support those kinds of forward that we could think about adding to the charter that would support those kinds of more responsible ideas, forward thinking?
I would go back to you all on that because the only section of the charter I've really reviewed at any point in time over the last 10 years has been my section, just to make sure that we were in keeping. When I do training for the Plan Commission, I always make sure to show them the state statute regulations, what's in the charter and what's in the code for how they should operate.
So if we were to change your name to Land Use Development and Environmental Planning, would that be?
Our title right now, planning director, doesn't necessarily mean the same in every community. So adding additional things, title doesn't. We cover everything.
Okay.
Bee permits, chickens.
Yeah, we got in trouble with the bee permit.
So yeah, we work on a lot of that.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Go.
are there any aspects of the planning and zoning Article 11 that either yourself from a staff position or your interactions with the Plan Commission have over at least in recent years, identified as maybe areas where you did not have enough clarity on authority or where authority was lacking that we should be aware of?
I know that the notification requirements are always a question in a lot of communities. So there's only the 185 feet that's in the state regulations. Some communities, without having it in writing, do expand that farther out. So for example, if you're in an A1 district, Webster Park, 185 feet doesn't really get to a lot of neighbors. So there's been some conversation because the 185 feet is in both the state regulations and the charter. There's been some conversation. I mean, we can always, just as a policy of staff, expand that notification. But I think that's the only one that sometimes when we get neighbors who say, you only notified 2 houses down and I'm 4 houses down and I'm impacted too. But it does add to the overall mailing costs and paper costs and other things like that. So you do have to walk that fine line. I wish we had email addresses that were easy to do for every resident, but still not there yet.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Kyle.
You mentioned, I think this is on, you mentioned in your presentation that you're responsible for the comprehensive plan. That's something that came up in our conversations about this section previously. Would you feel empowered or burdened upon if there was a section here that mandated that you have to update that at a certain interval?
We should be doing that. We should. So no, I don't think it's an issue. Good planning practices every 5 to 10 years. The hard part with an existing community is that it doesn't always need a full reboot every 5 to 10 years, which is what I think that the past staff had seemed to feel. So if you go back to the 2005, 2006 amendment, their focus was just to look at commercial areas because they felt like the residential didn't need to be looked at. So it might be more of every 5 years, do you go back and revisit and see if there is something that needs to be addressed and not open the whole thing up? Some communities do very selective areas, but you also can't just do one single lot. So it's a little a fine line of you need to look at it all. You can't just make one minor change. But every 5 years for a community that's completely established might be overkill. But not looking at it for 15 years or so is too much.
So currently it would be under your prerogative of whether or not you want to take a look at that.
I think we have talked about it. So in 2017, we looked at the map itself, but not the main bulk of the document, just for staff time, budgeting purposes, other things like that. But yes, I mean, if I had all the time in the world, yes, it's definitely needed right now, and it's needed soon.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mara, very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Okay, we'll move on to governance, and we have no business there. There member discussion and questions? No? Okay. So we'll move on to old business, and we have some subcommittee updates. And Kyle, you want to start?
Hello, everyone. So the ward subcommittee met on February 24th to discuss proposed recommendation to the full board, a decision or recommendation between wards and at-large based elections for city council members. So the current wards-based, at-large election system has existed since Webster Groves became a home rule city in 1954. Prior to that, Webster Groves was divided into 4 wards with council members elected from each of those 4 wards. What the subcommittee decided to look into, and kind of what our goal is how we can increase representation on both the city council, but then also expanding that onto our boards and commissions to ensure that representation is coming from all parts of the city. There were a couple of exhibits which were prepared by Ms. Kirkton. You can see over there an exhibit which has all of the city council members since 1996, I believe.
69.
Oh, 1969, excuse me.
No, maybe you're right,
I
96.
think it was 96 because I,
I'm dating myself.
no problem, which shows kind of a cluster sort of more on the northern parts of the city. We also added on to that, just because they're the members on this committee, the addresses of the location, addresses of each member of this committee. And you can see that a lot of those are sort of more on the north part of the city. What the subcommittee wanted to focus on, and we have not yet come to a recommendation, that's kind of what we want to discuss with you all and get your input, is how we can look either at a hybrid system, or if we can't agree to that, different ways that we can increase geographical representation, both on the city council and on our boards and commissions. So as I mentioned, there's not full committee agreement on the implementation of wards or not, but we want to sort of lay out both the pros and the cons of using a ward-based system. So as the section in the charter states, the council must consist of both of 6 council members and 1 mayor. The subcommittee considered a hybrid system, which would combine both at-large and ward-based council members. We also considered that wards would be revised along with the population every 10 years with the US Census. And after consulting with the Board of Elections, including a component of that, which gives a specific deadline of when those wards must be completed in order to allow for timely filing for those candidates. The subcommittee also wants to hear ideas for public engagement, especially from the Public Engagement Subcommittee, to answer some of the other questions that we have, including how many wards we would propose, whether we want to do that hybrid system where some members are elected at large, some members are elected by the ward, and then other considerations, including the staggering of those elections, and then selections of members in when there are no candidates in a ward. So the goals that we had in mind when considering looking at wards-based elections was to obviously increase the geographic diversity of those council members, lower the barriers of entry for candidates for city council by allowing them to campaign in smaller geographic areas, with the goal that those ward-based would allow for candidates to come forth that could address specific concerns of those geographic areas in the city more acutely. It would also allow for fewer residents per council member, which could potentially foster greater relationships and interaction between the residents and their elected officials. And that these wards, though it wouldn't be stated in the charter, could be used to better inform the decisions on who fills our boards and commissions throughout Webster Groves government. We all have this, we want to look at all of this because we want people to feel more represented in their government, and that people have more trust in their elected officials. We obviously also wanted to consider not only the pros of this approach, but also potentially some negative effects. There we do have the concern about these wards not having enough candidates to have an election. So that's something we want to be concerned about. We also have the concern of increased partisanship, or that decisions could be made that maybe would only benefit one ward versus the entire city. And then we also are aware of other municipalities that have issues in their ward-based systems, including practices like automatic courtesy and ward capital expenses that we want to avoid here in Webster Groves. So with that, we want to sort of broaden up the discussion to the full group to consider, kind of what we've proposed or what we're considering with the hybrid-based ward elections. But then also we want this board to consider ways that we can make every area of Webster Groves feel included in their government. We did propose some additional ideas, including for the board to consider as well, including publicly funding elections, adding a requirement to the charter that any board or commission created by statute would need to make those geographic considerations for their composition, creating geographic advisory task force that could explore issues that are affecting different areas in Webster Groves, hosting more street corner gatherings or walkabouts where residents could share their issues, sort of closer to where they live, and then using different social media platforms such as Mastodon to foster engagement with city residents. One other thing that I failed to mention, we have our beautiful map over there, which Miss Kirkton created. But then also we wanted to look at other municipalities and sort of what they're doing with wards. We use the same cities that we've been using for other comparisons, like with this compensation committee. All of those cities use wards except for the city of Kirkwood. And then we also looked at municipalities in Kansas City, and we did find that most similarly sized municipalities in the Kansas City area, both on Kansas and Missouri side, most of them do use wards. There were only one or two that did not. So those were our findings. I would ask any other members from our subcommittee to give their thoughts. And then also we want to hear from the full group as we go to our next meeting, and we hope to have our full recommendation ready to distribute for the March 29th meeting. So I talked a lot.
Thank you, Kyle.
Kyle, thank you so much. I know that was a lot of legwork for you to research those other communities. I wanted to confirm, when you say these other municipalities are using wards, are they using a hybrid system, or are they like a straight wards only system?
So I didn't find any in the table that I included in our document that used that hybrid system, though I
Mhm.
did mention, and we discussed in our meeting, that the city of Kansas City, which is obviously much larger than Webster Groves, does use that hybrid system where I think it's 6 are elected at large and 6 are wards based. And then they have the mayor that breaks the tie.
Mhm. Thank you.
My understanding was that Shrewsbury uses hybrid, but I could very well be wrong.
I'll have to double check. And you know what? I'll go through this again and add a column that indicates for each of those whether they are at large,
I
sort
could
of
be
hybrid.
wrong.
No, and I just haven't done that research, so I'll go back and do that.
Any questions or discussions?
So one of my concerns, I did research looking at the impact of wards on minority representation. And there's a fair amount of that. And basically what I discovered from studies that looked well done and combined a bunch of other things is that for small cities, changing to wards has no positive impact on minority representation. Now, many of those were in terms of Latino, because California has done a lot of this kind of stuff ahead of those cities. So currently on our board, we have too many people who are not white. According to the data, we should have 0.98 people who aren't white. And so I worry about, I would like to be anti-racist and not make changes that would limit what it is that's already going on in Webster. And that's really my concern about the wards. And it really, I want to avoid that rather than to facilitate that. So that's my serious concern about wards.
Do you find that the hybrid system, Matthew, with at-large members would help ameliorate that?
You know, when I think about that, then I think about some of them having term limits and some of them not having term limits. And I don't know that that seems very reasonable, because if someone has to only run in a small area, they can, you know, have their folks there who are always voting, so they can potentially keep getting in and in. Someone running across the community has to have a broader constituency, and that would be more difficult. So it would seem to me that it is more likely, and I have this is just me thinking, that it would be more likely for those smaller groups to have more experience. And when you're on a council, the people with experience know how things work and can do stuff. So I would worry that, you know, if someone had been in a ward, leading a ward for the last 15 years, and somebody gets in otherwise new, it has to represent the whole city. That was a concern. So that would be my problem with that. And that's just, I've never read anything about that. That's just as I think about it.
Okay.
So
I had some similar concerns. First, I want to thank Kyle and Jeannie, and then Matthew did a tremendous amount of excellent research with the studies and so on. So thank you all. I don't see, when it's all over and done with, that and I think I was someone who initially, when I went into this exercise, was pro-ward. I think that's one of the things I talked about. But I just don't see that the benefits are going to be that great, that it's worth, what do you tell the voters that it's going to be? We might get a little more representation south of 44. I agree again, Matthew made a comment, there might be other ways to address that if we see a, continuous bridge. So I just don't see enough of an upside here. It's not as if, we had a big number of people who were unrepresented. So that's my thought, without taking any more time.
Joe?
Yeah, Kyle, did the subcommittee talk about the term limit idea? And if why not?
So I think it was put onto the agenda today and because we were going to discuss this, whether the subcommittee should go back and look also at the question of term limits, because when the subcommittee was formed, the question was specifically asked about the wards question, but this section does also, it is the part where we indicate that there is essentially no term limit. So if the full board wants this committee to look at that question, we can certainly meet again, and we are planning to meet again, but I don't know if that's a separate question or if we want to just tackle that since it's section 2.1. So I'm open to the feedback of the full board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing, going back and looking at it, I think there were 3 or 4 council members who wanted us to look at wards and 1 council member to look at term limits. So, but I don't know, Kyle, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to have the discussion, but I don't want to take to a subcommittee a question that the full board, maybe if you didn't have the opportunity to speak on it. So, I have no issue with talking about it.
Well, I don't have an opinion at this stage. I just think that is something that maybe needs to go into the mix as we move forward with deciding whether a change toward ward or hybrid is appropriate to bring up to the voters. And it may need to be something that's part of the options out there to allow for, again, because we're talking about the issue of getting enough representation, was mentioned, and maybe in certain wards, and to encourage some sort of turnover over a period of time. And I'm not advocating any certain number at this stage. I'm just trying to think through it intellectually. Just as like, Matthew talking about the downside of going to a ward system and how it may have an adverse impact on where we are currently in our dynamics with elected representation. Now that can change over time. And I guess the question we need to be thinking about is, when we get past this current city council or iterations in the next, 4 to 6 years, what is the best system to have in place longer term? And I think that's the question we kind of need to grapple with here.
I'm glad that you bring that point up, because I think sort of my struggle with it is what are every other city is doing, wards in this manner. And I don't know that we're doing anything unique that has resulted in, as Matthew pointed out, we do really well with, representation on the council, but that's not guaranteed. And it's not through any situation that was brought up by whether we have wards or not. I think my goal with, talking about wards is we have no mechanism that guarantees representation across geographic boundaries. And it isn't just about city council members. And though we have the data of the past almost 30 years, it shows it hasn't really been that successful. If that is our goal, if that is not the goal of this subcommittee and full board, then we can drop the question. But
I would say that I certainly share Matthew's commitment to our taking an anti-racist approach to all of our activities. And I completely agree with Paul's comments that, we shouldn't do anything that we don't think there's going to be any benefit for, like just for the sake of doing it. But that being said, do think there are, some of the comparisons we've been talking about today are a little bit apples and oranges. I think partly because of the way our, where people live in our city. And I also don't really know historically where the minority members of city council, what part of the city they have lived in. So I think, I could be wrong here, but I think a lot of times when people think about where do Black people live in Webster, it's in the north side. And I don't think though that that's where the majority of our Black council members have come from. So irrespective of how many people of any color we should have on the committee, on the council, and it's certainly not to say that minority members can't represent the entire city. I do think that with a hybrid system, we will be getting more different types of diversity of thought, socioeconomic diversity, not just diversity of skin tone. So I think it really brings a lot to the table for us to focus on getting people from all different parts of the city. And I think the best way to do that is with a hybrid system where we get folks from all 3, 4, however many corners we decide we have, as well as some folks who are at large.
I have a question for the mayor. So you see a lot of people applying for boards and commissions, which does not cost them anything to do other than their time and effort. Do you see those people representing all parts of Webster with some equality, or do you have any idea?
Yeah, so we do require addresses. So I do always look at the address to see where someone lives, and we typically have a list of current members of a board and commission. And there is some effort to do that. I will tell you, it is very difficult to keep all the variables in mind that we need for any particular boards and commissions.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them that people don't even live here, because it's not about whether you live here, it's about whether you own a business in Old Orchard or Old Webster or Crossroads.
Yep.
For some people, it's a professional qualification if you're on the Architectural Review Board, which limits how much we can consider geography. This is a question that council is very, very aware of in terms of representation in our boards and commissions. But to be honest, we haven't figured out a way to solve it. And I don't think, just personally, putting a rule in the charter solves it. Encouraging us to go in that direction absolutely makes sense. But what we have now often, for example, is because we have requirements for business owners in certain geographic areas, we have vacancies on those commissions that go for months and months and months because we can't find the right person to fill that spot geographically. So I absolutely understand the intent here, and I agree with the intent here. The challenge is going to be, how is it that we mobilize people who in the past have not been mobilized to participate? Now, I will just say on this group, about, I think half of you have served on other boards or commissions or run for office already, and half of you haven't. And so part of my question in thinking about this, and this is not part of your hearing today, but is what made some of you who haven't before decide to do so? And then we've also we've worked with the Appointments Project, which is out of an organization in Kansas City, to try and encourage more women. We're in our elective office, we have women come out of your ears in terms of people serving, but on the boards and commissions, they are in a distinct minority, even though they're a majority of residents of Webster Groves. And through that process, we also, hopefully will encourage some more Black women to apply, but that doesn't solve geography, right? So you focus on one and you got the other. So that's not really a good answer to your question. I think we do have a pretty good variety, but there are a lot of moving parts in trying to assign people to boards and commissions.
I guess I would follow up. In general, and this is, in general, do people on the boards and commissions regard their roles representing the whole city or their local, neighborhood? Or is
I think it's the whole city.
Okay.
And most of them are driven, I think, at least my experience has been, by the subject matter. So you have people in the Green Space Commission who really are interested in how we keep the green, the parks, and our other nature preserves and so forth. And the same goes for somebody on the plan commission who's, interested in that kind of thing. So I think everybody, I believe, really does think broadly in terms of the full community. What drives it really is their personal interest and expertise.
I would just add, the subcommittee was never intending to make a recommendation to change a rule that would enforce this for boards and commissions, more that to mention it just to provide a more, rather than using a highway as a boundary, provide, some sort of guidelines for the decisions to be informed by.
Yes, thank you. And that does make sense. If you don't mind, I'm going to take the mayor hat off and put the political science hat on us for a second. In terms of Matthew's right about, I agree with you in the studies, smaller cities, but one of the things that you all haven't talked about when we talk about racial representation is the percentage of any racial group within the city makes a big difference. And we have very, very low
small
percentages. It is actually, I tried to do it a few years ago. It is impossible to create a majority minority district in Webster Groves, which is what a lot of the people who redistrict towards are trying to accomplish, to write long histories of excluding Black and Hispanic representation.
Yeah, when I did my statistics, I just did everybody who was non-white because there aren't.
Even with that number, you can't do it.
Yeah, no, that was what the data said.
Can I respond to Mayor Arnold's comments? I already was thinking I may be emailing you with some thoughts about why people don't.
I
Get
would
involved.
love, you
So
can
we-
email me, I'll buy you something to drink and whatever.
Can do that outside of this, obviously, but I agree with, I understand all the viewpoints, right? I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody's saying, but I really agree with the barriers to entry and getting involved in things. And I can see wards, while sounding good, just being one more reason for people not to get involved, because like there's too many factors, because I feel like I have a ton of factors keeping me from doing this personally. And I'm imagining I'm not the worst case of that, but there's a lot of people with a lot more problems with it than I do.
So you feel that the wards would create a barrier?
Yeah, it'd just be one more thing, like it would keep me from doing it, but maybe not. I mean, it could also be, oh, my house needs somebody, I should do it. But I'm thinking words isn't enough of that change to really motivate. It's just another exclusion.
But help, if I may, help me understand the thinking of why that becomes a barrier for at least the reason that you're raising, because you're bringing representation to a more localized area where theoretically you would have a greater chance of getting elected.
I guess I just meant that's just one more thing you have to fill. Like there's all these reasons I could not do it. And so when you're trying to find people, that's just one more, like, oh, my ward doesn't have an opening, or, like, right, it doesn't have to be a barrier, but it's just making the complications more that
Okay.
might prevent it. Yeah, it's not like having wards means I wouldn't do it, but maybe, if there's 3 other people in my ward, maybe I wouldn't, and maybe I would have felt better with the at-large.
Okay. So it's more of a complications,
Yeah.
complexity, which is, I guess, perhaps a downside to hybrid at least, and maybe even wards, is that it adds complexity to the perception of the political process.
And I think that also would speak to like how it could be like how we decide to stagger the elections would cause more confusion. If they're all at the same time at 4-year intervals, then that might not be a concern. But if it's, oh, it's my even year and I'm an odd ward and, do I get to go or not? I could see that.
And
Yeah, that's true. But they could always run for an at-large position
Yeah.
if that was their preference. I mean, I think it depends. I completely agree with what you're saying. And I think it really depends on what somebody's reasons, what their personal barriers for entry were. I think the ones we considered were, it's a lot cheaper to only have to conduct your campaign in a smaller quadrant of the city. And it's a lot less footwork and it's a lot more manageable. So for people with, busy jobs or little kids or what have you, if they don't have to cover as much territory and spend as much money, it's a little bit easier for them to do that. And I think with respect to the boards and commissions, that people might feel if they had a local person, they might feel that they were more likely to know because they're somewhat of a neighbor, that they might feel a little bit more like, oh, well, so-and-so down the street is on the city council. I guess I could be on plan commission or something like that. Or we would have people in the communities, council members, able to reach out and do a little bit more recruiting to increase some of that geographic diversity from across the city as well. So I think there's, lots of different factors to look at.
Another factor I just thought of is anybody in these hybrid systems, I guess lack of the aldermen who are at large, do they have higher status than the localized aldermen? Does that come, or vice versa, does that come into play? I guess Kansas City is the best example. And I don't know, it's obviously hugely bigger than we are, but I don't know the answer to that.
I think the answer would be, on paper, no, but how are they perceived? Are they perceived as more important or not?
Yeah, because I mean, the at-large would be at least portraying themselves as representing a viewpoint of the voters across the city as opposed to just, a ward. So that is a perception thing, which is in the literature talks about that.
One of the other things we talked about in our subcommittee group was how, and I don't know enough about our current council to know if people are like this now, but I know that in the past, there's been a perception that some council members do an awful lot more work than other people do. And they get a reputation, those hard workers get a reputation among the community as, well, if you want something done or you want someone to return your call, then call one of these two people. So one thought would be that if we had more direct representation, local representation, that people would know who to call and the work would be distributed a little bit more evenly among all of the council members and not just those who are willing to always answer their phone, respond to emails, meet with people, have a lot of time available and interest in doing that. Just want to share that as another thing we had talked about in our subgroup.
I'm curious, I wonder how much I just differ in how I view where I live, because I don't know that I know the people around me that much better. I have older kids and I know, we are connected to people all over the city. So that also may be a difference. Like maybe most people in Webster do feel that way and they would call their local person, but I could see myself knowing the person that's on the other side of the city and that's the person I call anyway.
I think that's human nature, at least today's human nature.
I also live on a big street, so like we don't connect in the same way that probably the smaller streets connect.
Anything else on wards? Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody on that committee.
And I'll be sending out another invitation for a follow-up meeting so we can have our full recommendation for the 29th meeting. So
Okay.
thank
So
you.
we're going to talk about term limits in that.
Is there anyone on the full board who has an issue with us also including term limits in our discussion?
I don't have an issue, but can I ask, like, we haven't talked about it much. Was it Pam put it on the list or something? But like overall, we really haven't had that come up much. Do we need an argument for why we should be looking at it?
That's a good point. Does anybody want to consider term limits?
I'm just wondering.
All
if
right,
we
let's
need
not
to
even.
bother. Yeah.
Has there been a push from anybody in the citizenry or elected officials for term limits?
During the course of my time on council as mayor, I've never heard from constituent requesting term limits. I honestly have no real understanding of what my colleague, Councilmember Bliss wanted. I think this was exploratory rather than a specific recommendation.
I'm just wondering if we skip it, unless we think there's a need for it, do we just let that one go?
Well, this maybe starts to get us over into the public engagement aspect. But I think this is one of the topics that will come up as we talk about these other issues, wards and whatever else. And voters will have a question, are you looking at term limits? So we need to be prepared for that either way.
So if we had the data on how long people are on council, I know we've had a mayor or two that have been around for a long time, but I don't know the length of council. Can we get that? Is that available someplace or somebody? Okay, thank you. Yeah, because that's just, if it's a problem, but if it's not a problem and people ask that question, we could say, it's not a problem. You know, people stay for a couple of terms.
If
and
we,
then
if
they
we
go.
could at least look back maybe to match up with the chart stuff here, 1996 and whatever
Mhm.
time frames, in that time frame, what's been the turnover? Which
Yeah.
maybe Jeannie, maybe you already had some of that.
Oh,
Just as a point of reference, I am the most senior of all members of the city council, and I'm in my 5th year of service.
Okay, so it's really not an issue that we've
Yeah.
got at the
Except,
moment.
I mean, let me just bring up a devil's argument here. If we move forward with proposing raising the compensation, that may create more interest in the topic at least. I don't know about whether people will stay longer on the council, but that'll be a question that voters will have.
I think the term limits issue was more ripe when Mayor Welch, was there for so many years. And occasionally someone might bring it up, but my answer always is, well, someone else should run, it's not her fault.
Yeah, historically, council members don't stay around a real long time.
And I don't think the compensation is going to be enough to induce people to stay. It's my impression.
Well, I mean, if we want to broach it a little bit and see what everybody thinks. Okay, so public engagement, we've met twice and we brainstormed a bunch of different ways to engage with the public. And the things that have come out were, number one, to have a focus group. And we were in the process of compiling a list of potential people to invite geographically across Webster. And so that list is being compiled. And then we were thinking sometime in late March or early April, it would require us to engage a facilitator. And I think there was some question about, I have no idea how much that would cost, but we have $5,000 budgeted for our charter review committee, and I think we're up to, we've spent 3,500. And okay. So that's one thing that we're looking at, and probably host that at the library and gather data from that meeting and see what people think. We're trying to prioritize what we would present to a focus group, and such as wards or maybe term limits and the compensation issue and whatever this group kind of thinks. So these are our biggies. We'll present to a focus group, and then also looked at the option of town hall meetings, whether it be stations where people can come through and see, like a poster board or something. What this is about compensation, this is about wards, and that we can gather input from the public in that way. And then also a survey, like a Survey Monkey, that's been done for the pool recreation center, and of course the DEI study that was done. So that's another way to gather what the public is thinking. And that's it so far. We'll have another meeting, and Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that for our meeting? Michael, do you have anything?
No, actually, you covered everything. I thought we had compiled a relatively nice list that you sent out. So it looks like we have a nice pool of people from all segments of the area. So hopefully you can put that in place as well.
Okay. Any questions?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may, so you mentioned the budget, there was 5,000 budgeted, there's about 3,500 extended. That certainly should not be a barrier to engagements. Once the facilitators are decided upon and those costs are together, the budget can be proposed to me, we will find the money. So occur. I have some questions about that which don't have to be answered right now, but are we looking for just a facilitator to do this, or are you going to title that qualitative data and then sit on it? So you simply on the focus group, but what really is the ask of this? That need to be considered?
Yeah, I would think that we would want to compile the responses in some manner so we can rate what we're hearing from the public. So the focus group that I've been involved with was just one, and that was the library expansion. And Margaret Eaton actually facilitated that meeting, and she compiled the data. How she did it, I have no idea. But, so, yeah, I mean, somebody with more experience with that would need to answer that question.
Happy to help
Okay, very good.
after you all give answers.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Are we on a hard stop tonight, you guys? Eric? No. Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah. We have questions and comments from anything already reviewed. Do we want to do that or skip around to number 10 and do the review updated? No, we don't. Somewhere we're missing that we were going to review Matthew's document. And I don't see that in here unless I'm overlooking it.
I think that could be considered 8B anyway.
Yeah. Okay,
I would put that under there.
all right, good idea. Matthew, could you bring up your document?
I can.
Madam Chair, I would just suggest that as we start this process of looking at the document, I think we need to start thinking through how to start prioritizing, of the many issues that we've talked about and Matthew's tried to capture comments here and there. Is going, perhaps just a suggestion that we go through this or start to go through this. And are we serious here, or is there something here that we want to work with? Because that will influence how each of the subcommittees, goes about, particularly on the public engagement side
All
of
right.
the issues that we want to raise with voters, citizens.
Yeah, and that Joe, was part of the agenda item, was to review and prioritize as we go through.
Has anybody who tried to get on been unable to? Okay,
I don't have Word, so I have not.
You
been on
what?
it.
You don't
I do
need
not
Word.
have Word.
you don't need Word.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, I couldn't see any of the comments.
yeah.
Okay, then I just need to
Click
try
into the,
harder.
you have to click into the little things to find it. It's not obvious when you first go.
I will
It looks
try
like
harder.
there's Nothing there.
Yes.
First page.
So it looks like this if you don't click it, and there's a little button up there at the top right if you look on the screen.
Hang on, you got to
Okay.
move Nicole.
Oh,
Nicole was hiding it.
Oh my God.
okay. So this section, there's a button and it says
Oh, that's not-
comments, and you click on that and they appear. See that button right there?
Or just click on the little box to the right of the text.
But no, you do not need Word.
All right, I will try harder.
Okay. But if anybody tries and can't get in or has trouble, please just let me know and I will be happy to help.
Okay, so we started with the preamble, which I messed up and said the date was wrong, and it's absolutely correct. So we can delete that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, on this preamble, I think there was some initial discussion of whether the preamble should say something more.
Yeah, it should.
And if that is the case, what is that more and how do we get to some proposal for what more is.
I think
I-
that's the next comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really like, the model city has a clause in there that I think would stick it on the end would work quite nicely, to what's already present. But we were also, does that say, Matthew, we were waiting for the,
Right.
council?
They were to submit their updated strategic plan and we were going to look at that.
Yeah. So, I don't know where that is, a strategic plan for the city, Laura.
So, right now, we are, this plan is with staff as they begin to have some specific policy tactics to the broader values and goals that we've created. And the mission statement has not been adopted, it will be adopted as part of the entire strategic plan that has been drafted in this.
Sorry about that, no microphone. It has not been adopted, but it is drafted along with a vision statement that's available on the city website. I don't know that it will be, I don't know, 2 months optimistically. Yeah, okay, 3 months after, before we probably finalize all that.
Okay, so in the model city charter on page 9, and under their preamble, in the last sentence of their preamble, it says, by this action, we secure the benefits of home rule and affirm the values of representative democracy, professional management, strong political leadership, public engagement, diversity and inclusiveness, and regional cooperation. I like that.
Mhm.
I don't know how others
Madam
feel
Chair,
about it.
I would
Yeah.
say that that directly reflects the contents of the current strategic plan drafting right there.
Okay. Um,
So you want to insert that?
yeah, let's, and we can see what other people think about it.
I will do that.
Can-
As soon as I find it to copy.
Can I ask a question? I think I might be speaking out of turn, but I guess looking at our timeline, we have to have this recommendation ready by
October.
of this year.
Yeah.
I feel that this exercise is doing what we've already done. Do we maybe want to like flag 15 items? Maybe we need to take homework. And then we can do a prioritization exercise also as homework. And from then that kind of serves to fill what our public engagement will be. We have this list of 10 items or however many items. I just feel like if we're going to go through and make edits once more, we've already spent the last 6 months doing that. Like, I think this exercise would be helpful if we went through and, highlighted that. I think everyone here has like sort of their things that they feel are most important to change. And if we only have the ability to, put 10 things on the ballot, I don't know, that's probably more than we can. Do we maybe want to look at this? I'm sorry,
They had 21 and 65.
we got 21, whatever, but putting allowing all 11 of us to rank in order what we feel is the most important thing to take to the voters might be sort of doing an internal survey before we're doing a survey of the public.
I see what you're saying. But how would we regroup if we're gonna take sections of it and is that what you're saying?
I think I'm saying maybe the categorization is what we can use this exercise to do, and maybe it's, someone's very, like, we've got 2.1 is a topic that we want to consider going to the public about. 3.7, whatever, however we want to categorize them, or we can name them. Maybe it's term limits is one, getting rid of departments is one, wards is one, I don't know. But I feel like maybe this group right now, we could determine what those topics need to be rather than making additional edits to.
Oh, yeah, I think as we go through, absolutely prioritize them.
Okay, but I think my main suggestion is I think we can prioritize like as a homework item.
Yeah, we could do
I
that.
think it'd be hard to.
Yeah.
Well, as in thinking about, what Kyle is saying, I think that as I thought about it, there were like 3 or 4 big things that we've talked about. One of them was compensation. Let me get my other notes here. Removing the boards and commissions. If it seemed like we had sort of general agreement on that. If we decide that that's what we want to do, that might be another task force to go through and say, okay, these are the sections we should remove. The other potential major changes were wards and term limits, which we haven't decided yet, and the numbers of signatures needed for various recalls and those kinds of things. Those seem like sort of the major issues when I was thinking about the total of what we've been talking about. But others may have other ideas about that.
And maybe that's what we should do is we should all, brainstorm what these topics are, and then we can use a prioritization tool for each of us. And then from there, what would inform what the public engagement is based off of. Because I feel like we can do public engagement, but if we're doing public engagement without asking a specific question, no one will come.
Yeah, no, I think that's, we know what the biggies are, I
Yeah.
think. And, you only have people's attention for so long that,
We want to make them feel that they're not wasting their time by coming if we don't have anything specific to request of them.
oh, yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
So do we agree that we want to remove boards and commissions from the bulk of the document?
I don't know if I'm quite there yet.
Okay.
I like the idea and I would like to explore it, but I felt confused because when we brought it up, Neil would be like, we need this, So I feel like we should, but I don't know how to do it cleanly and neatly. And I don't know if that means we need extra guidance on that, maybe,
Well,
It may be a subcommittee question would be my thought.
but it might also be outside. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
I was talking about the public engagement. I just felt very unqualified to make decisions. I feel even more so about this whole commission thing. I'd like to get rid of it, but I don't know what we can and what's like too much.
And I didn't bring up the categories as a way to say we're making the decision that, yes, we want to get rid of boards and commissions, but rather this is the question that we're actually considering making changes to. We need to get the input from this board that we want to consider it. The public, we want to get their engagement. And then after the public engagement, we would then actually start taking votes of we want to vote to get rid of it or to keep it or to ignore the question. So
Okay.
I'm completely respectful of not trying to get the cart in front of the horse with this, but
True.
Yeah, it could be a good subcommittee. I agree to dig it.
I mean, what what we need to do at some stage here pretty quickly is kind of put some things on paper and again, that once you start putting things on paper, then people start taking sides. But so there's a danger there, but we can't react to anything until we have something on paper. And to the idea of prioritization, I fully agree that we need to start putting some things up there and see what sticks.
Well, I'll go ahead and tell you my 2 top list is number 1 is the pay from section 2. And the second one is section 15.15 about the taxes. Because we have a lot of elderly residents in this area that can barely afford their taxes. And right now they cannot get any kind of rebates because of the way the charter's set up. And I'd like to bring that to Neil and see what can be done to change that where people on a fixed income would actually be able to get a tax rebate on some of the utility taxes we have. And I know it's more towards the state level on the actual real estate evaluations and taxes. I know they're at state level, they're talking about if you're 65 and on a fixed income, they cannot increase your real estate taxes anymore. And I know there's some stuff in our charter that says we cannot do that. And I think we need to address that to see what needs to happen to make that better for our senior citizens. I know me and Eric talked about it, and I'm not exactly sure how we have to reword that to make that happen.
This is what section?
It's section 15.15, the taxes.
We haven't talked about that at all, right? This is a new thing.
It got brought up
Yeah.
very, very briefly at the last meeting, because it's been brought up at the city council meeting. I forgot the date of the meeting. They actually had a little brief discussion about that.
Could we get a little more context background, just because we haven't discussed this?
Absolutely. Members, that section 1515, remittance of taxes is prohibited, is a charter prohibition that says that we cannot rebate taxes. So there was a conversation and the council actually funded a program to allow low-income senior utility tax rebates. So that the amount of money people paid to Spire or Ameren, that was the city tax, could be rebated as a way to incentivize economic growth for them and such in this time of inflation and things like that. But the charter prohibits us rebating those taxes. We cannot put public money back into a rebate program to pay back citizens for taxes they have paid to the city. So essentially, the charter prohibits the city from doing that. We cannot use the treasury to do that.
And do we know the legislative background for this?
I don't, we haven't researched it. What I do know is when you talk about other incentive things, such as when we get into development TIFs, the abatement of certain taxes in that regard, because they are state statutory provisions, they're considered a state sovereign taxing action. So therefore those are allowable. Many of the cities in this area have that rebate prohibition or the remittance prohibition in the charters. So it really speaks to the local nature of the taxation, which really falls to, our portion of the property taxes being able to rebate, our portion of any sales tax if we wanted to do a rebate, or the utility taxes are the three main areas that it would affect. So to Mr. Epper's question, however you wanted to draft it, if there's a policy goal from full repeal to anything in the middle is a matter of drafting and the language construction to what your goal is in presenting to the voters.
And there's some or significant budget impact from this?
Obviously, surprising when you give taxes back, that's an expense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a tax credit or a tax rebate is an expenditure in treasury management. So it is a cost. So we had budgeted $50,000. If you stop and think about it, a utility tax bill, to give you a sense, is 7% of the bill is taxed and goes to the city of Webster Groves. So think of your own gas bill at home, your own electric bill, whatever it may be. That's your percentage. That is the city tax. So the program that the city could operate could be set up at any level. We could say, we'll rebate a quarter of the taxes you paid, or we'll rebate up to a certain amount. So, I mean, there's many varieties, but to give you a full scope sense.
Maybe I'm mixing apples and oranges here, but I was aware of a program for disabled veterans or seniors or something with their property taxes. They could get a rebate. Is that only from the state and this has nothing to do with it, or?
That's correct. So the state law, obviously, the power to tax property derives out of the sovereign act of the state. And so they have set that program up so that the attorneys and the legal minds have interpreted that to then to be the state is permitting that, and it supersedes the charter prohibition.
So Webster Groves residents can participate in that.
They can
yes.
participate that through the state. They don't,
Okay.
they're not coming to us. The difference is if we wish to do a rebate in some manner that doesn't extend to other parts of the state, we are prohibited by the charter. For our portion of taxes that is paid, not school district property taxes and such. I mean, just the piece that belongs to Webster Groves.
Is this tax in question the city's portion of the utility tax?
That's correct.
So if it's 7%, that's like $7, let's say, if it's $100 bill, it's not a lot of money we're talking about.
No, it's not.
I don't see where it's going to change somebody's life one way or the other.
Well, for a low income senior who may be on fixed income, that was the
But
policy.
it would probably be even a lower bill than that.
Very well could be.
Yeah.
Do we have like a comparison? Like, yeah, do other charters not do this, or like the model charter doesn't have this as a comparison to use? So I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just trying to figure out what we should base it on.
It's an issue that's been brought up before.
Mhm.
And like I said, our city charter prohibits that. I mean, the senior citizens living on a very fixed income with everything going up, I feel they should be able to stay in their house.
But so are we just wiping out the whole section? Are we saying for senior citizens? I was just trying to figure out what we're proposing.
Proposing for senior citizens on a very fixed income.
So we'll say it's not allowed except for, like in the charter, we're saying
Right.
it can only be done for senior citizens on a fixed
On a
income.
fixed income.
Then is that appropriate, or should it be disabled?
Basically at the cost of poverty level.
Why not just take it away entirely and allow
just drop
through
that
ordinance,
section.
they could make their decisions of who's eligible for whichever, because there could be a disaster and you want to, give a tax rebate to those who suffered from that. And we wouldn't be allowed to do that.
That is
Yes.
correct. So again, this would be your recommendation, right? I mean, you can set the scope in the chart. Well, the voters will set the scope in the charter, but
If we're
you can
gonna-
propose what you wish.
Yeah, if we're gonna make the change, we should think big.
Yeah, just like what, yeah. just
So
put
right
it-
now, the way the charter's set up, they can't even apply for any kind of rebates.
That-
You
that
can't
is
change
right.
the ordinance because of the charter.
Right, and ultimately, it's not even applying for rebates, it's a matter of, we can't implement the program to even offer the rebate, so it's really the city. An ordinance would be null and void if it was passed, because it would be prohibitive of the charter.
So Why is this there? Is there a reason not to take it out?
That's what I asked the legislator. There's no,
Yeah.
they don't know.
Oh.
We don't know, I will ask. I
So,
don't know
no, but
because
so it is reasonable to say that nobody's concerned about removing it right now. It's, yeah.
It has never come up, other than we realized it in looking at implementing a program. It has never come up in recent history, I should clarify.
Okay,
May I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Sure. And the reason it's not in any council recommendations is we didn't learn of this problem until after we made you a recommendation.
okay. Well, let's add that to the list. Should we go article by article and prioritize?
Can I ask, do we want to talk about what else we need to talk about more? Like, so we said maybe we need somebody to talk about the boards and commission question, right? Like that needs to be a separate meeting. The other one that I feel like we didn't settle is the percentage for referendum, right? Like that's come up a couple times and we asked about getting more information, but that's pretty open. Like, should we figure out what still needs significant work to decide on, or is that not the way? to
Well,
go?
yeah, I mean, that's why I thought going through this, we could hone in on some of these things.
If we
but
can get through
maybe-
all that in the next.
Maybe if we go through and say, okay, what you just said is important. Make a list
So,
of priorities.
so a list to prioritize and a list to discuss more.
Yeah.
Off to the races.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes.
if it would be helpful after you guys do your categories, we could do a survey monkey for each of you and you could prioritize that way. That would be helpful.
Okay. That would be helpful, but I like the input as we go along, because I think if we're all doing this in a silo, we don't hear one another. So to me, the preamble and what it says is very important. Then we go to Article 1, the form of government. I don't think there was really anything there. Matthew.
No.
The next section is the council, of course, and the compensation was an issue. And that's on the priority list.
I think that the wards versus at large and the term question should be considered separately. Even though they're in the same section.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So that, and then the wards and compensation, and then the,
Madam Chair,
yes,
may I ask Mr. Driven, does he intend to bring up the 12-month residency issue again?
Well, out of respect for you all, like I said, it's beating a dead horse, but I think if we're looking at barriers to entry, that's one of them.
I would just say that was the one day I wasn't here and I was very upset that I wasn't, because I very much agree with you. So I would like to consider it.
Yeah, I just regard it as, and a lot of communities don't have that. So.
But a lot of communities do.
Not for, I don't believe a lot of them do for the city council, but I mean, why should the judge have to live here for a certain number of years? I mean, that makes no sense to me at all, but
But with the judge in particular, you're being being judged by your peers. And do we consider
true.
somebody outside of Webster Grove, is that
It's
your
not
peer or not?
true of any other, of any other unit of government. If a judge is basically handing out traffic tickets, I mean, is there really a Webster way of doing it? Or maybe if they're from Webster, he's gonna feel, it's a guy, it's his neighbor or something, he feels sorry for them. Should that be happening? I mean, there's not a Webster or Kirkwood way of doing parking tickets, I don't think. Well, I guess there is that guy on Rock Hill. Remember the cop there? Gave out more tickets. He gave out more tickets than anybody in the country, I guess. Until he once he retired.
And I'm a victim of that too.
But yeah.
I think we all are.
We all are.
But I mean, there's, I think residency requirements also give the impression to people that we're being exclusive. And I don't think they add any value really if you live here for a year before running for council, or if they think you're kind of a carpetbagger, the voters are gonna know that, they won't vote for you. But anyway, I, out of respect, I didn't bring that up. I thought it was a decided issue.
Nothing's decided.
Thank you for recognizing me.
I disagree, but with the position, I think a 1-year residency is reasonable, but it's just me.
Maybe rather than focusing when we're talking about topics, rather than focusing specifically on 2.3, it could be the question of residency requirements throughout the charter.
Right.
Yeah.
And I that is one of my minor issues to talk about.
Okay, also in chapter 2, article 2, there was Matthew didn't like the word ordained. You still want to?
I really hate that word there. So established would be fine with me. Now, whether
But I
it's
think
worth doing it, whether that's not a big thing.
Yeah, it's not a big thing.
A little thing.
And I think the city attorney also kind of took issue, didn't he? A little bit.
I don't
What?
think so.
Did Neil?
I have a comment. I don't know if you saw my comment. I thought what Neil said was not that it couldn't be, but that it was about an ordinance and not about ordaining in a ministerial.
No, I understand that it is the legal term. It is just not the term that anybody else associates with.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as anybody else, so.
So if you go down the street and ask them what ordained means,
If I asked the president of the Ethical Society, he'd say maybe it was okay.
he might, I don't know. Oh, the president, yes, the president would know.
But I think Matthew's point speaks to something. There's kind of antiquated language and in some cases, non-inclusive language that was not ill-intended probably at the time, but is no longer in use. Is that something to, you'd hate to have to change every article, but it kind of runs throughout the document, and again, you can't fault the people who did it at the time, but should that be addressed? I'm just posing the question.
Well, I've been wondering too, how much we roll that stuff together or not, and maybe we can't, because if you roll it together and then somebody doesn't like one, it's all out. But I agree, like the morals and the insane asylum and all of those things, yeah. So whether it's individual language pieces or an overall language is the question.
As far as how that would be posed to the voters, though, it would have to be section by section. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Yep.
Yes. Okay. But as a topic.
But that would be lower on my priority list. That's not.
I put it at the bottom of the page.
She's already ahead of us.
And doesn't the US Constitution use the word ordained too? I mean, the preamble?
Maybe,
Okay.
but that was written a while ago.
Yes, it was.
I would also just add.
And they're trying to get rid of that now. So,
I would just add on this topic, though I didn't really, it's not low priority. St. Louis County, because I looked it up, also does use ordained. So there's some context.
Yeah.
I could look up other places.
yeah, no, I don't disagree that it's used widely. I just don't like the word. No. And at the bottom of the page is fine with me.
I'll agree about not liking.
Article 3 and the city manager. Anything there? Did we ever decide about the, what was it, requiring a written succession of who takes over in the absence of the city manager?
I thought we decided that was a job description thing.
And then
So that's was taken out of the charter. I can't see.
but there was no change.
There anything in Article 4 administrative service?
This is, Madam Chair, is this where we start getting into this whole issue of whether the naming of departments and whether to provide the city manager with more discretion here?
Mhm.
At least, if I may, at least my own initial opinion is the name changing to the administrative departments and such. I think this becomes a little more complicated, and I almost need to kind of understand how we would approach the whole ball of wax rather than trying to one-off things through this part. It's just my own view.
Yeah. For example, personnel is human resources and
Well, and I love the idea of just trying to put in the model charter language, which just has a general thing, but then what does that hurt? And again, we have to get input on that. But yeah, I think it's a big, not an individual question.
So are we putting that as part of the priorities to, I mean, that's related to the departments and those kinds of management things. So we're putting that as a priority, or?
I feel it's a priority, but is that something that I don't know if it would be a topic for a focus group or not. Yeah.
Do you want the city to be flexible or rigid? Although it sounds like you guys, that the city council can write rules ignoring what the charter says or superseding the charter. Is that more? No, that's not true. Okay.
So Madam Chair, with
Yeah.
respect to titles and departments, I don't think we've ignored any, but I would say that we've just deployed working titles for the departments, whether it's directors or, human resources offices. It would be nice if there were to change, but in the broader scope of the priorities that you all are talking about, we can continue functioning. It has not impeded any of our functions.
Yep.
It does add a lot of complication to the charter, though. Maybe that doesn't matter because maybe nobody's going to read it anyway, but it makes it a lot harder for an individual to process when it doesn't line up.
So we've got in there in that section, removing the requirement that the city manager lead a department. So do you lead a department now?
I do not.
So then you are not following the charter. That's-
Well, when you put it that way.
Okay.
No, I am not.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. And that would be fine with, I'm happy with removing that. But that would be, that would all be part of I would think the structural change of, if we're going to eliminate those, having a section that adds that ability with those kinds of things to the document. So that would deal with those kinds of questions.
So also in that section was the point that Jennifer, you, I think, made about the legal meaning of morals, and I've lost it.
Yes, that was more of the dated words. Morals is in there 3 times, I think.
Yeah.
You're talking on page 20.
Well, I just had it now. It's
Maybe.
gone.
Page 20 is a different one.
Oh, that's a different issue. Okay.
But that's more the wording, yeah.
Yep. So it's section 13 or number 13. Prescribed limits which businesses, occupations, that morals, the health, morals, and safety and security and general welfare of the people.
Yeah, that's one of them.
It's in 12, 19, and 28.
Okay, yeah, that's on page 12.
There's a reference somewhere in describing one of the positions, the individual has to be of high moral character or something like that, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I don't see moral character.
But it wasn't moral character, but there was a section, there's a note in the online document, and I put a note into like,
Okay,
you had started and I commented on it, but I can't remember the phrasing because I was doing it online, not in this printed document. It was, I think, the same place as, about not discriminating. Maybe that wasn't, that maybe they were separate.
I think in 5.3, that was a place where the word knowingly about a person who, any officer, head of any department of the city who shall audit and approve for payment any expenditure shall forfeit office. And that's where I suggested to put the word knowingly approve. I got the impression that Neil felt that was a good idea, that someone shouldn't lose their job for a mistake. I think that's an important thing to include.
I would agree with that.
Mhm. Yep.
So in 5.4, did we agree to delete that whole section? It's the purchasing agent.
That was what the staff recommended, that it could be deleted.
Yeah.
Could city manager remind us the issue here and why, deleting 5.4 or even 5.5 can be done without any adverse issue?
Happy to answer.
So 5.4 and 5.5 relate to the procurement code of the city. Procurement code, since the adoption of the charter, the state law has required certain procurement elements across all the municipalities. And again, back to the staff level, we have to follow the state procurement code, but then again as well, the charter is not encumbering us in any way. It's not barring us, but also it's not, if there was a procurement method that came up that is new, the charter doesn't necessarily authorize that. And I don't have a good example for you. The best I could get to would be cooperative purchasing, which is an addition to the world of purchasing since the charter was written. Cooperative purchasing essentially says we at the city don't have to do an RFP for everything we buy, a request for proposal, but rather someone else does that proposal, arrives at a bid that qualifies under the procurement law, and we can piggyback on that bid to buy the product at that price. So it saves the purchasing department that function that we run in finance time. So it certainly could stay. It's not going to cause problems, but again, it was looked at that view of we have to comply with state law. It's really a restatement in charter, and the ordinances are much more, there's pages within the code of ordinance that relates to purchasing, that speaks to really the specifics, and the idea of a purchasing agent and that purchasing section just wasn't necessary in the charter since it is so general and looking at those financial duties.
So not essential, more of a cleanup activity if we were to go that route.
Exactly, yeah. Again, the ordinances, in fact, would not need to change. Like this is one, if you remove this from the charter, the city council wouldn't even need to update the ordinances to continue the current operation we have.
Right, but there's no problem out there.
There is no existing bar that we've bumped into as of yet, so. Just to highlight one quick thing, sorry. There's no bar, but again, back to language questions and changes. So if you look at number 3, and it just pops in my mind, general storerooms, right? For years, Public Works has been the maintenance division, right? They hold maintenance of city buildings. So they're storing these things, but technically the charter says the purchasing agent, which is in finance, is supposed to have general control of the storeroom. So I mean, there are those kinds of little moments where the charter doesn't line up with some of just the day-to-day functions, right? I mean, finance, while we certainly can go through the purchasing side of it, we don't count the rolls of toilet paper we have and such, we make a bulk purchase rather than maintaining storerooms and such. We do so for office supplies, but not other things. So there's those little inconsistencies that line up in purchasing.
Okay.
So dropping those would be fine with me.
I'll make a note of that. Okay. 5.6 is audits. I have that marked with a star and a priority. And that was the independent audit shall be made of all accounts of the city at least annually.
Members, if you remember this one, really, and I know Mr. Hiles typing, so I'll let him finish, but when you get there, the timeline is
timeline.
really an issue.
Yeah.
We are lucky if we get the audit back 6 months after the fiscal year, much less, I think it's 45 days in the charter. Just simply because of the nature of government audits are more and more complex every year. And also the number of people going into government auditing is smaller. We will RFP likely this year for audits. And if we get 2 responses from 2 accounting firms, we'll be lucky. I mean, we're probably going to get the same firm that we've had respond. Their number of accountants wanting to do them are going down because they're so complex and time consuming.
Is there a suggestion on what timeline?
Well, the state requires us to submit by the end, 6 months after the end of the fiscal year. We have to submit our annual report, which is the comprehensive financial report, to them by 6 months after the end of the fiscal year. So, certainly, I would at least ask for that. Now, that said, if the audit is late or delayed for any reason, the state, you can still submit it to the state, but it's, you could incur a penalty depending on what date it gets submitted. So
45
45 days.
versus 6 months is quite a big change. And
Well, it is an absolute big change, and we aren't able to comply with the charter. Now, the revenue for the fiscal year that ends in July or June isn't even received fully until September, the way it flows from the state to the county and then to us. So we can't even do a soft close on the fiscal year until mid-September to turn books over to the auditors. And then it takes, almost a solid 3 months. I mean, this year, I think we received the audit in the intervening period between Christmas and New Year's to be able to submit it.
So are you suggesting, Eric, that it should be the end of the year or?
Looking at it, looking at the audit, the report of the audit shall be completed and submitted to council. I would say at the same time it's submitted to the state. The deadline is really driven by the state now when we have to file that. And so it's going to be, unless the state changes 6 months later, I think it's really that 45th day, is just not doable. We do provide the council with quarterly reports so they can see it, but it's not the audited numbers until such time as they return. So, and of course, the council gets it the moment we get it back from the auditors, goes to the council so that they can have the audited numbers right away. We did not comprehend which language to put in. We just noted in our review. So I mean, happy to look at word different something for you.
as I was looking at my notes here, I did say as prescribed by ordinance. I mean, if we were to leave the city council to decide what the deadline is.
Mhm.
Just to take out the 45-day aspect.
I wonder if there's a marker there. I can't think of any language to suggest, but as Mr. Peterson said, the soft close is difficult because when we get the financial information from state, from county, as it trickles down, and so we certainly can't initiate an audit then. So perhaps the language could say within 45 days of a soft close, 60 days of a soft close, because we can't guarantee when we get the other information. So rather than locking it in, I think that puts the onus on us to be responsible for initiating the audit once we have the information. Just a suggestion.
Except I don't know, is there a definition for soft close?
No, I would certainly need to come up with some language.
Yeah.
And just to add to that conversation, the auditors are good at turning things around, but we have no control over the audit industry. They may turn out to be, due to the challenges they face, getting staff, it may be a 5-month process once they get the information going forward. Again, that hinders us. It's something we have to look at, but that is, we rely on the audit, we use the audit to make that annual report. If we were to generate the audit report ahead of the audit being done, it'd be duplicative work, but that's about a 35 to 40 hour operation to just simply pull those numbers. It's not an easy report built out of the system because you're pulling things out and then rearranging to meet the state standard and the GASB federal standard for how you have to submit the annual reports and that data. And then you change the basis of accounting in those reports. So just to give you a sense, it goes from a budget basis to a modified accrual basis, which you're moving, to give you a sense, expenditures from different years around to meet the accounting requirements.
So Madam Chair, Mr. Dugan brought up a good point with the language. When staff went through this document, we were aiming to clean it up or to identify problems. We did not suggest any draft language to members because we certainly want to leave that open. But if there are areas you would like us to suggest draft language, we're happy to do that if you wanted to identify those.
Yeah, no, I think that would be helpful because what I'm figuring in my mind is there are things that we prioritize that the public would be interested in. Some of these things are extremely important to the city, but maybe the public is like, so I'm getting a parallel track of what's a priority here and what's a priority that we want to bring to the public. I'm trying to keep two different lists here. But yeah, if you language in these situations would be very helpful. The next point was 5.7, the fiscal year. And it's eliminate or specify as stated by ordinance. Do you see anything there, Matthew?
Yep. Right there. So do you want to, what would you like to do with that?
What does it say? I can't see.
Oh, okay. Staff recommends, delete or determine by ordinance, delete section, give, ability to change the fiscal year if it becomes necessary. And you say in 5.7, it currently allows for the fiscal year flexibility by ordinance. Or that should.
So
So
it
that-
does
and
allow
that's what it
for,
says.
it does allow for
they
flexibility.
can
The
do-
council can change it. It's just a matter of, I think to Ms. Finney's point. The charter says this and then the council passes an ordinance and changes it. Does it start to harmonize or deharmonize for the reader or those that are trying to line up the charter and what the city does?
So it would be a nice thing to change, but if we want to add that to the list, that would probably be a lower priority, although there may be a number of things that would be simple and straightforward and people would say, fine. And it wouldn't be contentious.
I think at this point, I'd like to figure out in my mind how we can deal all this. Kyle, you wanted to would a survey monkey for prioritizing fit your,
Yeah, no, I think
Your needs.
some sort of what, like, once we get the list of the topics or the categories, or if we want to organize it by section, however we determine, sending that out to this group, and then in the next meeting, I'm not saying it's going to be the 29th meeting, but the next meeting, we would discuss the results of that survey. And then I think that informs the public engagement committee. And also, once how I view that, we'll get public engagement, we'll meet together, we'll have our final discussions, and then we'll vote on what we want to actually submit and what we want to submit to council.
can you fit the, because there are so many, each section, there may be something in each section that's maybe important, maybe gets overlooked or not make the list. But, there's so many points in here that may need changing. I'm trying to figure out how we put this all together in a survey.
So could we each generate a list of 5 top priorities or 10 things that we think, and look at those and combine those lists and see where there was, because I'm not sure how you would do a survey with all these different things.
I mean, there's. the
But that's then gonna get the major things. It's not gonna hit any of the minor changes.
thing-
So,
yeah.
Madam Chair, I was thinking along those lines, if you all had categories or each of you had 10 things. We can certainly put those 10 things in a survey and you all could rank them in terms of priority or you can look
Yeah.
at some other things, but maybe that would help whittle it down.
Yeah. I mean, just the language part of it, like, the city attorney shall represent the city. I know that was an important point. And how do we gather all that together so we don't overlook things that are very important, but not something that the public is gonna gather into?
Yeah, but to Matthew's point, maybe the idea of us putting, what are our 10 things that each of us individually would like to see done in the charter changes? And at least see where those, each of our list of 10 come out. There are going to be a whole bunch of other issues that are going to be of lesser priority, that are more technical in nature, maybe,
Yeah.
that we're just going to have to pull that list together and, in the next few weeks and months to determine, whether is there a consensus or we go through votes to decide which of these to put forward as part of the report.
So part of what is I'm hearing and thinking about is that there are issues that we think would be contentious or of interest to the community. And then there are other issues that are, small details or, small things that the community won't care about. So maybe it's, a list of the things that the community might care about, and that would help inform the outreach committee about, well, these are the areas that you should talk about. And then that other list would be really a separate
Yeah,
set of things.
that's what
Madam
I'm
Chair?
thinking. Yes.
One, since they are this separate list that you're talking about, the second list, since many of them are technical, I
Right.
mean, it certainly is not inappropriate for me to give staff more work, to ask staff to say, you made a lot of technical recommendations. What are your priorities? Or what do you think are the most important things? And then you as a commission can decide whether those things should be put forward or not.
Everyone gets homework.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess considering our next agenda items, will be continuing through this and look at our priorities and
Do we stop at 5.7? Is that accurate?
yeah.
Yep.
Future meeting dates, March 29th is our next one. Do we want to have a doodle poll to see what we should do next? I feel like tying this up is going to be really important to get it under wraps. What do everybody else think?
I'm not suggesting that we meet on the 3rd, but if we went back to the 1st and 3rd Mondays, the next meeting would be the Monday, the 3rd, which would be 5 days after the 29th meeting, but
Yeah, so we had said the 3rd was not a good idea. So whether we skip that and go to the 3rd Monday, or whether we want to look at other.
just do 2nd and 4th Mondays. Any-
I'd rather avoid fourth Mondays.
Avoid what?
Fourth Mondays.
Fourth.
But that's just me.
We're all still set on 5 o'clock.
I think so. It probably works best for Stan.
Available.
It's earlier than I would like, but what we've done the whole time anyway.
5:36, if it works for you.
I mean, yeah, anything later is better for me, but I also like I filled it out in the doodle poll, the third Monday in April, I'm teaching and I wouldn't be here no matter the time. So, yeah. So it depends on what we're doing. If we're doing the third Monday, the time doesn't matter. I won't be here. So we can just stick with it.
Scheduling something, two more meetings following the 29th and see where we are after that work.
To make
Great.
sure I'm tracking. So when I send the doodle poll, I'm sending it for the third Mondays of every month. For the next couple of months, I won't do like through the calendar year. Is that the only option I'm sending is the third Mondays?
Are we like, is there a particular reason that we have to set it out for, like, is it, what if we just agreed that at every meeting we schedule the next two, is that, or is that inappropriate for room?
Yeah. Yeah, I think at this point, maybe 2 meetings ahead is good. Are Wednesdays terrible for anybody?
Meaning Wednesdays at this time, 5 to 7?
Yeah.
I think also the reason we don't settle 2 meetings out, I like it, but we end up all just like, it's a lot of back and forth, so it's hard to get everybody's schedule together too. I don't know what the best answer is.
The best answer is to be able to get a quorum to keep moving along. So
Right, yeah.
I mean, we're going to get into, as weather warms up and things happen, it's going to get increasingly hard. And we'll have to make some choices.
What about second Monday and fourth Wednesday?
Ooh, creativity. I love it.
Fourth Wednesday is for court.
Oh my God.
You tried so hard.
Fourth Tuesday.
When is the court?
In April, it's the second and fourth, but some months they're first and third, so it moves around.
Oh, it does move around. Okay.
I like fourth Tuesday.
Or second Monday and fourth Tuesday?
That's
April
a
10th,
council meeting.
25th.
Oh, council. Oh my God.
Um,
Council's on the first and third Monday. Tuesdays. You're fine. That fourth
That
Tuesday.
works. No, it works.
Eric,
Tuesday.
So are we,
sorry to interrupt. We could do it on the Wednesday court night if we use the police conference room. There will be courts,
could.
there will be other people
parking.
here, but parking will be difficult.
I like Tuesday and not court. If
Also
people like
walking
that.
home.
Okay, what did we decide?
So second Monday and fourth Tuesday regularly,
Or
unless,
At least this next month.
so the 10th and the 25th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
and it's Easter Monday, is city holiday?
They're open. We're open.
Okay.
Those work for me.
Want you to know the 25th is Arbor Day, so
We'll bring a tree in.
I'll be out to Arbor Day and we're gonna get up.
Well, they use very long. Left arm.
10th and 23rd.
At 5. Okay, look at that. This is gorgeous.
Good work, Kyle. Okay,
Time for dinner.
is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
A second.
all in favor?
Aye.
We're
Aye.
adjourned. Thank you very much.
1 minute early.
So Kyle, did you get into the document?
I learned that I don't know